This is my favorite holiday. It's my absolute favorite day of the year. Christmas is okay. Presents are great, love presents. But this is the best holiday of the year. Because God has done something for us that no one else has ever been able to do. We know, this is the best part, we know exactly, well, we think we know exactly where this tomb that Jesus stated was. We think we know where the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea is-ish. And it's still empty. We know the people Jesus talked to. We know the places where Jesus walked. Our God, the God that sends his Son to raise from the dead, doesn't do things in secret. He's a very transparent God. He doesn't hide things from us, so when we give a certain amount of money, he starts to reveal strange and new and deeper truths. But he sends his Son to die for all people. This is my favorite holiday of the year. Again, not because there are a bunch of presents or there are huge parades. I think there are Easter parades, though. We're not going to get into that. But because this is a day we celebrate the biggest event in history, the resurrection of Jesus. Last week we talked about the triumphal entry. We talked about Jesus coming in to Jerusalem, and the disciples and his other followers were laying their coats and laying palm fronds, so the donkey he rode on didn't have to touch the ground, and honored him as if he were a visiting king or a conquering king who had already won. Jesus, last week we talked that he didn't come into Jerusalem as one leading an army, but one who already won the victory. If you have your Bible this morning, please turn with me to Luke chapter 23. Luke chapter 23. We're going to follow Jesus to the cross and past the cross this morning. Jesus is arrested in Luke 22. And after Jesus has been arrested, he's held by these guards all night. And while awaiting the day of his first trial, his captors beat him and they mock him and blindfold him. And they say in chapter 22, verse 64, they say, "Prophesy, who is the one who hit you?" What they do, they blindfolded Jesus and they had a rod, and they just smacked him with this rod and say, "Hey, tell us who hit you. You're so smart. You're supposed to be the Son of God. You're supposed to be the King of the Jews. Who hit you? If God really sent you, you're going to have all kinds of special knowledge. So tell us who hit you." And all of this, they say Jesus was silent. And this torture continues until morning when he's brought before the elders of the temple and on the charge of claiming to be God. We've said before, in Jewish culture, to claim to be God, or the Son of God as Jesus did, was the most serious of offenses. And it carries this penalty of death. So when Jesus affirms, he says yes, that he is the Son of God, closer to the end of chapter 22, the elders bring him to Pontius Pilate. We all know this scene. Pilate was the Roman ruler of this area. He handled the big stuff. He handled the stuff that no one else could. Under Roman law, only the state, only Rome could give approval for execution. And so they bring him to Pilate. If you have your Bible open this morning, let's look at Luke chapter 23, starting at verse 1. It says, "Then the whole body of them got up and brought him before Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, 'We found this man misleading our nation and forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king.' So Pilate asked him, saying, 'Are you the king of the Jews?' And he answered him and said, 'It is as you say.' Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, 'I find no guilt in this man.' But they kept insisting, saying, 'He stirs up the people, teaching all over Judea, starting from Galilee, even as far as this place.' When Pilate heard it, he asked whether this man was a Galilean. So the actual charges they bring against Jesus are false. They accuse him of forbidding people to pay taxes to the Roman Empire, claiming that he was Christ, he was a king. And claiming you're a king of the Roman Empire and competing with the Roman Empire treated like a treason, someone who's committed treason. And this is a testament to how much these elders despised Jesus. He was a threat to the status quo. If Jesus was who he claimed to be, the Son of God, then these elders were going to be on their way out, which meant the loss of their livelihood. And so Jesus had to go, and they knew just how to do it. The elders knew the Roman officials couldn't care less about these Jewish people, and so using a little wordplay, they could accuse Jesus of crimes against Rome. Now, Jesus never did any of these things. He never forbade his followers to pay taxes. He never started a rebellion against the empire. He never claimed to be an earthly king. But using this wordplay, using some clever wordplay, we get these treasonous charges brought up against Jesus. And so the state is very eager to put down insurrection. They're very eager to put down any kind of rebellion because it's a threat to empire security. It's a threat to their power. Now, Jerusalem as a whole at this time is a hotbed of rebellion. Off and on through the entire history of the Roman Empire in that area, rebellions pop up on a regular interval. You can almost sit and watch by it. And just a few years after Jesus' death, there is a rebellion in Rome when we lose the great temple in Jerusalem. In 70 AD, we see the great temple in Jerusalem is destroyed when Rome comes in to quash a rebellion. So the timing is right. The era is right, and that's something that happens on the regular. There are rebels everywhere in Jerusalem. You can't walk 5 feet without finding out that someone's starting a rebellion or someone's starting a militia to oppose Rome. They are a people under occupation. And so it's the easiest of charges to say this guy is causing insurrection. He's causing all kinds of disruption. We of the temple we're just law-abiding citizens here, and this guy's trying to mess up everything we hold dear. He's trying to destroy Roman values. And in a way, yes, because his values are way better than Roman values. But, however, their plans are temporarily thwarted because Pilate can't find any reason to find Jesus guilty. He can't find any fault with Jesus. When he found out he was from Galilee, Pilate had to turn Jesus over to Herod because Jesus was now out of Pilate's jurisdiction. He had to send him to Herod, the ruler of the northern region of Israel. Now, Herod had wanted to meet Jesus for some time and had hoped to see a miracle as Jesus was famed for doing. This time when he's coming into Jerusalem, he's recently raised Lazarus from the dead. People are starting to hear about Lazarus being raised from the dead, that Lazarus isn't still alive, and that he has brought someone back from the dead. Not only that, but just before the triumphal entry, we see Jesus healing a blind man. Now, Jesus healed a couple blind people. He's also healed the lame. We've talked about the true nature of these miraculous events and what has to happen in your brain, what has to happen to your body for you to be able to walk again, for you to be able to see again. And so Jesus doing what no one else can do is very well known. Very, very well known. And so Herod wants to meet Jesus, but he meets Jesus. He questions Jesus at length. Pilate does. Sorry, we haven't gotten there yet. And he says nothing at all. But after hearing the chief priests and elders shouting accusations at and about Jesus, there's nothing we can do. So when he meets Herod, he goes through the same thing. Herod berates him with questions. He wants to see a miracle. And he asks him question after question after question. And Herod holds him in contempt. Verse 11 tells us that after treating Jesus with contempt and mocking him, he is given what Luke calls a gorgeous robe and sends Jesus back to Pilate because his crimes were committed in Jerusalem. Crimes were committed in Jerusalem. And so Herod's saying, no, you got to go back to Pilate. You've got to face your crimes. You've got to face your punishment there where your alleged crimes were committed. So let's pick up at Luke 23, starting at verse 13. It reads, Pilate summoned the chief priests and the rulers of the people and said to them, you brought this man to me as one who incites the people to rebellion. And behold, having examined him before you, I found no guilt in this man, regarding the charges which you make against him? No, nor does Herod, for he sent him back to us, and behold, nothing deserving death has been done by him. Therefore I will punish him and release him." Jesus has now gone through 2 trials, and each has found him innocent of any wrongdoing. Both Pilate and Herod have gone against the claims and demands of the chief priests and the elders of the people and refused to kill Jesus. So, to appease them, Pilate suggests that people have Jesus punished and then released. Now, I want to talk about the word punished there for a minute. Jesus has already been punished once. He was held in jail overnight. He was tortured overnight. That's one degree. The punishment that Herod gives him is a new level of degree. A lot of people don't survive the punishment that Jesus is about to go through. I'll spare you the gory details, but more often than not, people become exsanguinated. They lose enough blood to where they stop living. And then he's going to have him released. But these rulers would not allow that. These chief priests won't allow Jesus to simply be taken and reprimanded. But the gospel tells us that a large crowd gathered outside of Pilate's palace and demanded that Jesus be crucified. In verse 18, Pilate tries to release Jesus, but the crowd demands Barabbas. He was a murderer and a rebel, released rather than the innocent Jesus. Pilate again tries to release Jesus, but fearing more rebellion, he sends him to be crucified. Now, crucifixion is something that the first readers of this gospel would know very, very well. And it was a process that people were subjected to on a near daily basis, on a very regular basis, at the least. And it was very effective. No one survives a crucifixion. Absolutely no one can survive a crucifixion. By its very nature, it is 100% effective. But not only that, it's a great way for Rome to stomp down rebellion. It's a great way for them to make examples of people because it's public, it's efficient, and it sends a message to all those who can see. This is what happens when you go against Rome. And this is what Jesus was supposed to do. This is what Jesus was sent here to do. Starting in verse 33, we read about Jesus' crucifixion. He'd been led from Jerusalem to his execution ground, alongside 2 others. And up to this point, Jesus, like we said, has been beaten to near death. Most people don't survive that second beating. In our Bible study, The Case for Easter, we discussed these levels of beating and what that looked like and how Jesus would have looked after that. It would have been an absolute mess. And he's in constant agony. Before he was let out of the city, Jesus was beaten with what was called a scourge. And this is a multi-stranded whip embedded with bits of metal and bone, and what it does well, it rips and it tears. And oftentimes this would be enough to kill you before your death sentence has even begun, even carried out. On the journey to the place where he would hang on his cross, he was so weak that an onlooker named Simon is pulled from the crowd and forced to help him. Reaching the place Jesus was nailed to and raised up on the cross with a sign above his head which reads, "This is the King of the Jews." Because crucifixion, as well as inflict pain, was designed to humiliate. And Jesus, even more so, his belongings were being gambled over and he was being mocked by those who looked on. This is a terrifying sight. This is a heartbreaking sight for his disciples, for anyone who knew him. Before this time, Jesus had about 120 disciples that followed him, that obeyed him, that learned from him. And to see this happening, to see your Savior, this Messiah that you followed for so long, be taken and treated this way is an absolutely heart-wrenching event. But in all this, Jesus shows his love for us. And he bears it in stride. In verse 34, as he's hanging on the cross, he begs God, he begs the Father to forgive those who are doing this to him. And as he approaches his end, he takes all of his sins all of our sins onto himself as a perfect sacrifice. With his last breath, he proclaims that his work is finished. The old covenant covenant is now complete, and the new covenant comes into place, and Jesus dies. Now, almost everyone thinks that this was the end of Jesus, and that his disciples watched their Lord die, devoting years and years and years of their lives, 3 years of their lives, to this guy who just died. Can you imagine the sheer shock these guys have to be in, the sheer mental anguish that watching your Savior, who a lot of them thought, even though he kept telling them otherwise, was going to come as a conquering king and going to, pull himself off the cross and summon thousands of angels to come and conquer the Roman army. A lot of them thought that in this moment, this is what's going to happen. And they're waiting, and it doesn't happen. And we see him breathe his last. Their lives are shattered. In that moment, their lives are absolutely shattered, and they walk away from Jesus on the cross. And the Roman soldiers take him off. Let's look down at Luke chapter 23, starting in verse 50. It said, "And a man named Joseph, who was a member of the council, a good and righteous man, he had not considered a plan and an action, a man from Arimathea, a city of Jews, who was waiting for the kingdom of God. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. And he took it down and wrapped it in linen cloth, and laid it in a tomb cut into the rock where no one had ever lain. So he was buried in a tomb of a secret believer, Joseph of Arimathea. In other accounts, a 12-man guard is set up, and a stone opening is sealed with a rope and stretched over and sealed with wax. All of this was done in order to prevent anyone from stealing Jesus' body." This would have worked very well. The apostles were just fishermen. They were workmen. They were regular guys. And they would have had to fight a dozen armored and armed guards in order to get into Jesus' body, let alone take it away. So if they managed to steal it, they would be easily caught. They would be exposed as frauds. But look over at chapter 24. It says, "On the first day of the week, at the early dawn, they came to the tomb having brought spices, which they had prepared, and they found the stone rolled away. And they found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were perplexed about this, behold, 2 men suddenly stood near them in dazzling clothing. And the women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground. The men said to them, 'Why do you seek the living among the dead? He's not here, but he has risen. Remember how he spoke to you while he was in Galilee, saying that the Son of Man was to be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and the third day rise again.' So 3 days later, on Sunday, on Resurrection Day, after the women had heard all the things that had been told to them, they come and they bring these spices, they bring these herbs, and it's a last rites. It's a laying of the flowers on the headstone sort of ordeal. They did not expect to see anything that happened on this day, but they hear this message. They go to report it to the apostles who had gone into hiding. No one but Peter believed what they were saying, and he goes into the tomb to find it empty. And so this morning, on Resurrection Day, we look at this, what is often called a story. We look at this account, and we get to ask ourselves, do we find this story to be either nonsense, or do we also rush to the tomb to look for Jesus? Jesus says several times to his disciples that one day he would be put to death, and he would then raise from the dead. And through that death, he would bring salvation to us. Paul teaches us in Romans 5:8, "But God demonstrates his own love toward us, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us." No matter who we are, no matter where we come from, no matter the life we've lived, regardless, Christ died for us. Jesus suffered and died for each and every one of us, no matter where we've been, no matter what we've done. And even now, offers this grace, this salvation. I love grace. I love the concept of grace. Because in grace, when you break the law, you escape all penalty. But when you keep the law, you bring the penalty on. of jokes that we tell each other today. It's the same kind of graffiti you see on the bathroom wall at Walmart. We are very much the same. We haven't advanced much as a people, only in technology. But the temptations we face are very much the same. And no matter who we are, no matter what we've done, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Christ died for those mocking him while he hung on the cross. Christ died for those who were gambling over his clothing. He died for those who denied him. He dies for those who embrace him. Because even in our sin, even in our darkest moments, Jesus loves us so much that he died for us. And this morning, we're about to leave this place. In a few minutes, we're going to leave. In a few minutes, we're going to go. We're going to have Easter dinner with our families. We're going to have a great afternoon. But Monday morning, we're going to be out in the world again. Monday morning is a whole new day. And what do we do with Monday morning? What do we do the day after Easter? Are we the same people that we were on Sunday? A lot of us, yeah. A lot of us are the same people we're going to be on Sunday. But are we living as though Jesus died for us? Are we living that we went to church? Are we living that we believe Jesus died for us? Or are we taking it for granted? Or are we just rejecting it? And all of those are choices we can make. All those choices we are free to make. But one day we stand before God. He will tell us, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Or he will tell us, "Depart from me. I don't know you." We need to choose how we act, how we live. Still lost, Jesus died for me. While I was still lost, Jesus found me. Or are we going to live like none of this matters? And this is the offer that Jesus makes for us. He says, "I died for you. I made this sacrifice for you. And nothing can pay for your sin outside of Jesus." In Hebrews, it talks that goats and bulls can't finish the payment for sin. Only Jesus, who died once for all time, for all men, died so that we can live. This morning, if you don't know Jesus, you don't have that relationship with Jesus, or you feel far away from Jesus, I want to talk to you about that. I want to pray with you. I want to help you along that way, because we can figure this out. We can work toward that. A lot of people say, "I don't want to come to Jesus until I get my life together." But while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Christ doesn't care at all whether or not our lives are together. That's the best part about Jesus. He doesn't care at all about that you are addicted. He doesn't care at all that you are in this sin or that sin. He doesn't care, because he died for you the same. Because while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That was his whole mission, to come and find the sinners, to come and find those who didn't have their lives together. And so when we say, "I want to get my life together before I talk to Kirk, before I come to church, before I become a Christian," don't. We can't. We absolutely can't. There's a reason that he came before we were ready, because we're not going to be ready. Our lives will never be in a spot where we deserve to come to Jesus. That's not how any of this works. But he says, "Come to me. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. While you were lost in sin, I died for you and all those who were around me." And so this morning, if you feel far away from Christ, if you feel far away from Jesus, you haven't talked to God in a while, come and talk to me. We'll talk to God together. We'll get this relationship figured out. Let's pray. Father God, thank you so much for allowing us to come here on Resurrection Day to worship you, to be so joyful that your Son came and in his love died for us. Thank you for everything you've given us, for the grace, for the mercy, for once for all time, sending your Son so he doesn't have to come again, or we don't have to make sacrifices for you, to you, anymore. Lord, I pray that those of us who are here today can take this gospel, and take it to others. And if we don't know you, I pray that you us safe until we meet again. In your Son's holy and precious name.